The bullet shattered the whiskey bottle 2 inches from Eleanor Ortega's hand, and she did not even flinch as amber liquid sprayed across the saloon bar, because in the 3 months since she had ridden into Fort Stanton, New Mexico, alone with nothing but a horse and her father's old rifle, she had learned that showing fear was the quickest way to get yourself killed. The laughter that erupted from the corner table was harsh and deliberate, the kind of sound men made when they wanted to prove something to themselves, and everyone watching. Eleanor slowly turned her head, her dark eyes settling on the three ranch hands who had been drinking since noon, their faces flushed with alcohol and the particular brand of meanness that came from thinking they could do whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted. The bartender, a nervous man named Silas, who had objected exactly once to the way certain customers treated his establishment before deciding his own survival mattered more than his principles, was already backing toward the kitchen, his hands raised in a gesture that said he wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. "That was my drink," Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room with the kind of calm that made smart people nervous and stupid people even more aggressive. The man who had fired the shot, a thick-necked brute with a scar running down his left cheek, stood up with exaggerated slowness, his gun still in his hand, his smile wide and ugly. "Was it now? Well, maybe you should be more careful about where you drink, sweetheart. This here's a respectable establishment, and we do not much care for women who come in here acting like they own the place." Eleanor had heard variations of this speech more times than she could count since arriving in Fort Stanton on a cold March morning in 1878, her money belt containing the entire proceeds from selling her family's failed homestead in Kansas, her heart heavy with grief for her father who had died that winter, and her mother who had followed him into the ground 3 days later, both taken by the influenza that had swept through their county like divine judgment. She had come west because there was nothing left for her in Kansas except memories and creditors, because her father had always talked about New Mexico like it was a promised land where a person could start fresh, and because staying in that house with its empty rooms and lingering smell of sickness would have driven her mad. The town had not welcomed her with open arms. Women alone were objects of suspicion and contempt, especially women who refused to take work in the brothel or find a husband immediately, women who instead rented a small cabin on the edge of town and started taking in laundry and mending while quietly asking questions about available land. They said a woman alone was asking for trouble, whispered it behind their hands and sometimes right to her face, as if Eleanor's very existence was an affront to the natural order of things. She had proved them right in certain ways, though not the ways they expected. Trouble had found her in the form of drunk men who thought she needed teaching, claim jumpers who assumed she would be an easy mark, and shopkeepers who charged her double what they charged anyone else because they figured she had no choice but to pay. Eleanor had handled each situation with the same cold determination that had gotten her through her parents' deaths and the long journey west, and so far she was still standing. "I am not acting like I own anything," Eleanor said now, her hand moving with practiced casualness to rest near the knife she kept strapped to her belt under her worn leather vest. "I paid for a drink, same as anyone else. You shot it. Either you pay for a replacement, or we have a problem." The scarred man's smile widened further, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "A problem? You hear that, boys? The little lady thinks she can give me problems." He took a step toward her, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, his gun swinging carelessly in a way that was meant to intimidate. "Why do not you go on home before you get hurt? This is not a place for respectable women, and if you are not respectable, well, there are better places for you to earn your keep." Eleanor was opening her mouth to respond, her muscles tensing for whatever came next, when the saloon doors swung open with enough force to slam against the walls, and a voice cut through the tension like a blade through butter. "That is enough." Every head in the saloon turned toward the entrance, and Eleanor felt something shift in her chest as she took in the man standing silhouetted against the afternoon sun, tall and broad-shouldered in dusty trail clothes, a weather-beaten hat pulled low over his face. He stepped inside with the kind of easy confidence that came from genuine capability rather than false bravado, And as the light hit his features, Eleanor found herself staring at a face that was both hard and handsome, all sharp angles and sun-bronzed skin, with eyes the color of storm clouds that were currently fixed on the scarred man with an expression that promised violence if his warning went unheeded. "This is not your business, Zane," the scarred man said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty, and his gun was no longer swinging quite so carelessly. "Isaac Zane," the newcomer corrected, his voice low and steady, as he crossed the room with deliberate steps, his hand resting on the grip of his own pistol in a way that suggested he knew exactly how to use it. "And I am making it my business, Cole. You and your friends are going to apologize to the lady, pay for her drink and the one you destroyed, and then you are going to leave." Cole's face flushed darker, anger and alcohol mixing into something dangerous. "You cannot come in here and tell me what to do. We were just having some fun. If she cannot handle a little teasing, she should not be in a saloon." Isaac moved so fast that Eleanor barely tracked it, his hand shooting out to grab Cole's wrist with bruising force, twisting until the gun clattered to the floor. "Fun," he repeated, his voice gone deadly quiet. "You call threatening a woman fun? You call destroying her property and insulting her fun?" He shoved Cole backward hard enough that the bigger man stumbled, nearly falling over a chair. "Get out, all three of you, before I forget that I am trying to be civilized about this." For a long moment, Eleanor thought Cole might actually be stupid enough to fight, but whatever he saw in Isaac's eyes apparently convinced him otherwise. He bent to retrieve his gun with jerky, humiliated movements, his face twisted with impotent rage, and then he and his companions were shuffling toward the door, muttering threats that were just quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. "If I see you bothering Miss Ortega again," Isaac called after them, and Eleanor was startled that he knew her name, "we will have a conversation that ends with you leaving Fort Stanton permanently. Understood?" Cole did not answer, but the way he hurried out the door was answer enough. The saloon slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in low murmurs, though Eleanor could feel every eye in the place watching her and Isaac with avid curiosity. Silas emerged from the kitchen like a cautious rabbit, already reaching for a fresh bottle to replace the one that had been destroyed. Isaac turned to Eleanor, and she got her first clear look at him in full light. He was perhaps 25, maybe 26, with strong features that managed to be both rough and refined, like someone had carved them from granite and then taken the time to add careful details. There was a thin scar above his left eyebrow and dust in the lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors, and when he pulled off his hat, his dark hair was matted with sweat and marked with the permanent crease of someone who wore a hat more often than not. "You all right?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice that made something warm unfurl in Eleanor's chest, despite her best efforts to remain wary. "I had it handled," she said, which was only partially a lie. She probably would have had to cut Cole to make her point, and that would have brought the sheriff down on her head, and Sheriff Daniels had made it clear on multiple occasions that he considered her presence in Fort Stanton more trouble than it was worth. A smile tugged at the corner of Isaac's mouth, quick and there then gone. "I do not doubt it, but sometimes it helps to have backup, even when you do not strictly need it." He gestured to the bar. "Can I buy you that drink? To replace the one Cole destroyed?" Eleanor studied him for a long moment, trying to figure out his angle. In her experience, men did not do things without expecting something in return, especially not for women they barely knew. But there was something in Isaac's steady gaze that seemed genuine, an openness that was rare in this hard country, and she found herself nodding before she had fully decided whether it was a good idea. "Whiskey," she told Silas, who poured with shaking hands and then retreated again as quickly as possible. "But I pay for my own drinks. I did not ask you to intervene, though I suppose I should say thank you for doing it anyway." Isaac settled onto the stool beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them, and ordered a beer for himself. No thanks necessary. Cole and his friends have been causing trouble since they hired on with the Henderson Ranch last fall. Someone needs to push back against them before they get even worse. He took a long drink and then set his glass down carefully. I am Isaac Zane, though you probably figured that out already. I work cattle drives mostly, picking up ranch work when I am between runs. Just got back from pushing a herd up to Colorado. Eleanor Ortega, she said, though he clearly already knew that too. I do laundry and mending, and I am looking to buy land for a small ranch when I save enough money. His eyebrows rose slightly. A ranch? That is ambitious. Land is not cheap around here, and running cattle is hard work even for experienced ranchers. I am aware, Eleanor said coolly, preparing herself for the inevitable lecture about what women could and could not do, should and should not attempt. I grew up on a homestead. I know how to work. But Isaac just nodded thoughtfully, his expression interested rather than dismissive. Homestead where? Kansas, near Lawrence. My parents died this winter, and there was nothing holding me there anymore. She said it flatly, without emotion, because she had learned that showing vulnerability invited either pity or predation, and she had no use for either. Something shifted in Isaac's eyes, a recognition of shared pain that made Eleanor think he understood loss more intimately than most. I am sorry. Losing family is hard. He was quiet for a moment, turning his glass in his hands. My parents died when I was 15. Comanche raid on our homestead in Texas. I was out hunting when it happened. Came back to find everything burned. Eleanor felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. That must have been terrible. It was. But it also taught me something important. You can let grief destroy you, or you can let it make you stronger. You choose which one every single day. He met her eyes. Seems like you have been choosing strength. It was possibly the most understanding thing anyone had said to her since her parents died, and Eleanor had to look away before the sudden burning in her eyes could turn into actual tears. I do not have much choice. Weak women do not survive long out here. Strong women do not have it easy either, Isaac observed. People in this town talk, and what I have heard is that you have had trouble from just about every direction since you arrived. But you are still here, still standing, still working toward your goals. That takes a particular kind of courage. Or a particular kind of stubbornness, Eleanor said, trying for lightness to cover the way his words affected her. My father always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Stubborn is just another word for determined when it works out in your favor. Isaac smiled, a real one this time, that transformed his stern features into something genuinely handsome. Tell me about this ranch you want to buy. What are you thinking? Cattle? Horses? Against her better judgment, Eleanor found herself talking, telling him about the small parcel of land she had been eyeing about 5 miles outside of town, near the river where the grass grew thick and green even in the dry months. She talked about her plans to start with just a few head of cattle, build slowly and carefully, prove to the men who controlled the banks and the land sales that she was a legitimate businesswoman who deserved to be taken seriously. Isaac listened with focused attention, asking smart questions that showed he knew the cattle business inside and out, offering suggestions without being condescending, treating her dream like it was not only possible, but inevitable. They talked until the afternoon light turned golden, and then amber, until Silas stopped jumping every time they moved, and Eleanor realized with some surprise that she was enjoying herself in a way she had not since before her mother got sick. Isaac was easy to talk to once her guard came down, intelligent and thoughtful with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh despite herself. He told her about growing up in Texas, about the years he spent working cattle drives after his parents died, about the 1,000 small hardships and occasional joys of life on the trail. So why Fort Stanton? Eleanor asked eventually. Why settle here when you could work cattle drives forever? Isaac's expression grew serious. Because there is a difference between surviving and living, and I have been surviving for 11 years now. I want to live. I want to put down roots somewhere, build something that lasts. Fort Stanton seems like as good a place as any. and better than most. He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Plus, it has proven to have some unexpected attractions. Eleanor knew she should probably deflect the obvious implication, should probably remind him that she was not looking for romance or complications, that she had goals that did not include getting entangled with a cowboy who might drift away on the next cattle drive. But the words would not come, because the truth was that Isaac Zane had done something in the space of a few hours that she would have said was impossible this morning. He had made her feel less alone. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and then Silas was there asking if they wanted another round, and the spell broke. Eleanor shook her head, suddenly aware of how much time had passed and how much she still needed to do before dark. "I should get back," she said, sliding off the stool. "I have laundry to deliver before supper." Isaac stood as well, settling his hat back on his head. "Can I walk you home?" "It will be dark soon, and after what happened with Cole—" "I can take care of myself," Eleanor said automatically, and then softened it with, "But I would not object to the company." They walked through Fort Stanton as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the mountains in the distant shades of purple and gold. The town was small by most standards, just a collection of buildings clustered around the main street with the military fort visible on the hill to the north, but it had everything a frontier community needed: general store, saloon, blacksmith, church, and a dozen houses, ranging from tidy to ramshackle. Eleanor's cabin was on the southern edge, a one-room structure that was drafty in winter and probably would be sweltering in summer, but it was hers, paid for with 3 months' rent in advance, and she had slowly been making it into something approaching a home. Isaac carried the basket of clean laundry she had picked up from Silas without being asked, his presence at her side, drawing looks and whispers from the people they passed. Eleanor knew what they were thinking, could practically hear the gossip already forming. "The Ortega woman has caught herself a man, about time. Maybe she will stop being such a disruption now." The thought should have annoyed her, but instead she found herself feeling oddly protected, like Isaac's presence beside her was a shield against all the small cruelties she had endured since arriving. At her cabin door, Isaac set down the basket and tipped his hat. "Thank you for the conversation. It has been a long time since I enjoyed an afternoon that much." "Thank you for the intervention," Eleanor said. "Even though I did not need it, I am glad you were there." "About that," Isaac said, his expression growing serious, "Cole is not going to forget what happened today. He is the type to hold grudges, and he does not like being embarrassed in front of witnesses. You need to be careful, Eleanor. Watch your back." The use of her first name sent a little thrill through her that she tried to ignore. "I have been watching my back since I got here." "I will manage." "I am sure you will, but maybe you do not have to manage alone anymore." Isaac met her eyes. "I would like to see you again, if you are agreeable to that. Maybe take you to dinner at the boarding house? Mrs. Chen makes a pot roast on Thursdays that is the best food in town." Eleanor should say no. She should thank him politely and close the door and go back to her solitary existence, where no one could disappoint her, or leave her, or die on her. But the hopeful expression on Isaac's face, the memory of how good it had felt to talk to someone who actually listened, the simple fact that she was so tired of being alone, all of it combined to make her nod before she could talk herself out of it. "Thursday," she agreed, "but I pay for my own meal." Isaac's smile was bright enough to rival the setting sun. "We will argue about that later. 6 o'clock?" 6 o'clock. He tipped his hat again and walked away whistling, and Eleanor stood in her doorway watching him go until he disappeared around the corner, a strange lightness in her chest that she refused to examine too closely. She went inside and lit her lamp and sorted through the laundry that needed delivering, trying to focus on practical matters, but her mind kept drifting back to storm gray eyes and a voice that had said trouble should fear her instead. The next few days passed in a blur of work and anticipation that Eleanor tried very hard to pretend was not anticipation at all. She delivered laundry and took in new loads, haggled with the general store owner over the price of soap and thread, and spent her evenings working on her ledger, carefully tracking every penny she earned and saved toward her goal of buying that piece of land by the river. The numbers were growing, slowly but steadily, and she calculated that if she could maintain her current pace while avoiding any major expenses or disasters, she might have enough by next spring. She saw Isaac twice before Thursday, brief encounters on the street that involved tipped hats and warm smiles and a few words of greeting that left her feeling oddly flustered. He was staying at the boarding house, working odd jobs around town while he waited for the next cattle drive season to start, and from what Eleanor could gather from overheard conversations, he was making a good impression. People spoke well of him, said he was reliable and honest, and not the type to start trouble in the saloon or cheat at cards or mistreat his horse-high praise in a place where character was measured by such things. Cole and his friends, on the other hand, had apparently been making themselves scarce since the confrontation, at least where Eleanor was concerned. She still saw them around town occasionally, but they crossed the street when they saw her coming and did not meet her eyes, which suited her just fine. She was under no illusion that the problem was solved permanently, but at least for now, she could move through Fort Stanton without constantly looking over her shoulder. Thursday arrived warm and clear, the kind of spring evening that made New Mexico feel like a paradise. Eleanor found herself taking extra care with her appearance, washing her hair in the basin and putting on her one good dress, a dark blue cotton that her mother had made for her 2 years ago, and that still fit reasonably well despite the weight she had lost over the winter. She brushed her long dark hair until it shone, and then pinned it up in a simple style that she hoped looked elegant rather than desperate, applied a tiny bit of precious rose water behind her ears, and then spent 5 full minutes staring at herself in the cracked mirror and wondering what on earth she was doing. Isaac was exactly on time, knocking on her door at 6 o'clock precisely, cleaned up and shaved with his hair still damp from washing. He wore a clean shirt that might have been new and actual trousers instead of dusty trail clothes, and the way his face lit up when she opened the door made Eleanor's heart do something complicated in her chest. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. "Ready?" The boarding house dining room was crowded with the usual mix of travelers and permanent residents, all talking loudly over plates piled high with Mrs. Chin's famous pot roast and potatoes and carrots. Eleanor had eaten here a few times when she first arrived in Fort Stanton and had not yet secured her cabin, and she had forgotten how good proper cooking could taste after months of making do with whatever she could manage on her small stove. Mrs. Chen, a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and sharper opinions, seated them at a corner table with a knowing smile and a comment in Cantonese that made Isaac laugh and Eleanor blush, despite not understanding the words. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing, comparing notes on their respective days, debating the merits of different cattle breeds, discussing the political situation in the territory, and whether New Mexico would ever become a state. Isaac told her about a horse he was thinking of buying from a rancher down in Roswell, and Eleanor told him about her ongoing battle with the banker who kept finding excuses not to take her land purchase seriously. The conversation flowed as easily as it had in the saloon, punctuated by comfortable silences and occasional laughter, and by the time Mrs. Chen brought out apple pie for dessert, Eleanor realized with some shock that she was genuinely happy. "Tell me something," Isaac said as they lingered over coffee, the dining room emptying around them. "What made you decide to come to New Mexico specifically? You said your father talked about it, but there are a lot of places a person can go to start over." Eleanor considered the question, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "My father grew up in Santa Fe. Did I mention that? His family was there for generations before the Americans came. He met my mother when she was teaching at a mission school, and they decided to try homesteading in Kansas because that was where the free land was. But he always talked about New Mexico like it was home, like it was where he belonged. After he died, I kept thinking about all the stories he used to tell, about the mountains and the clear air and the way the light looks different here than anywhere else. And I thought maybe if I came here, I would feel closer to him somehow, understand him better." And do you? Isaac asked gently. Feel closer to him? Sometimes, Eleanor admitted. When I am walking at sunset and the mountains turn purple, or when I smell peon smoke in the evening. Those moments, I think I understand what he loved about this place. She looked up, meeting Isaac's eyes. But mostly I am just trying to survive and build something that would make him proud. I think you already have, Isaac said. Your father would be proud of you, Eleanor. Coming here alone, working as hard as you have, refusing to give up even when everyone tells you that you should, that takes tremendous courage. Or tremendous stupidity, Eleanor said, but there was no real self-deprecation in it, just an acknowledgement of the fine line between the two. Isaac reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers for a moment before settling gently over her fingers. Not stupidity. Never that. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, and that is saying something given the company I have kept over the years. The warmth of his hand over hers sent electricity up Eleanor's arm, and she found herself turning her palm up, letting their fingers intertwine. It was a small gesture, barely more than hand-holding, but it felt momentous, like crossing a threshold she had not even known she was approaching. Isaac, she said quietly, needing him to understand something important. I cannot afford to be distracted from my goals. That land, that ranch, it is everything to me. It is my security, my future, my proof that I can make it in this world without depending on anyone else. I know, Isaac said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. And I would never ask you to give that up or put it aside. But Eleanor, having goals and having someone who supports you in achieving those goals are not mutually exclusive. You can be independent and still let people care about you. I do not have a good track record with that, Eleanor said. Everyone I have ever cared about has left me, one way or another. I am not planning on leaving, Isaac said firmly. I know you have no reason to believe me, and I know that promises are cheap when you have been let down before. But I am asking you to give me a chance to prove that I am different, that we could be different together. Eleanor wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to throw caution to the wind and take the risk of trusting someone again. But caution had kept her alive this long, and old habits died hard. Can we take this slowly? She asked. Can we just see where things go without making promises we might not be able to keep? We can take it as slowly as you want, Isaac agreed. I am not going anywhere. They walked back to Eleanor's cabin under a sky full of stars, their hands still linked, talking quietly about nothing in particular. At her door, Isaac hesitated, clearly wanting to kiss her but waiting for permission, and Eleanor surprised herself by rising on her toes and brushing her lips against his cheek, a brief contact that somehow meant more than a dozen passionate kisses might have. Thank you for dinner, she said. I had a wonderful time. So did I. Isaac squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Can I see you again? Maybe this Sunday after church? We could take a ride out to that land you were telling me about. Look it over with fresh eyes. I would like that, Eleanor said, and meant it completely. Over the following weeks, Isaac became a constant presence in Eleanor's life, woven into her daily routine in ways that felt natural rather than intrusive. He would show up in the mornings to help her carry water from the well, insisting it was on his way even though it clearly was not. He accompanied her on deliveries when she had heavy loads, his presence deflecting the worst of the harassment she had grown accustomed to enduring. On Sundays, they rode out together to explore the countryside, Isaac pointing out good grazing land and water sources, Eleanor sketching plans in her notebook for the ranch she was determined to build. They were taking things slowly, as Eleanor had requested, but there was an inevitability to the way they drew closer that reminded Eleanor of water flowing downhill, natural and unstoppable. She found herself thinking about Isaac when they were apart, looking forward to their time together with an anticipation that was both thrilling and terrifying. He made her laugh with his dry observations about town characters, made her think with his thoughtful questions about her plans and dreams, and made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her parents died. The town noticed, of course. Fort Stanton was too small for anything to go unremarked, and the sight of Eleanor Ortega and Isaac Zane spending time together became a regular topic of gossip and speculation. Most people seemed to approve, or at least found it less objectionable than a woman living alone, though there were always a few who muttered about fortune hunters and foolish women who should know better. Eleanor tried not to care about the gossip, but it was hard not to hear the whispers or see the knowing looks that followed them through town. The banker, Mr. Whitmore, was one of the gossipers who seemed to view Eleanor's relationship with Isaac as proof that she had never been serious about buying land. When Eleanor came in to make her monthly deposit, 6 weeks after that first afternoon in the saloon, Whitmore leaned back in his chair with a patronizing smile that made her want to throw her money in his face. "Miss Ortega, I hear you have been keeping company with young Zane. Does this mean you are abandoning your little dream of ranching, planning to settle down like a proper woman should?" Eleanor forced herself to smile sweetly, even as rage burned in her chest. "No, Mr. Whitmore, it means I am continuing to save money for my land purchase, while also enjoying the company of a good man. Women can actually do more than one thing at a time, surprising as that may seem to you." Whitmore's smile tightened. "No need to get sharp with me, Miss Ortega. I am simply pointing out that ranching is hard, dangerous work, and perhaps now that you have other options, you might reconsider this notion of yours." "I am not reconsidering anything," Eleanor said firmly, placing her carefully counted money on his desk. "Now, will you accept this deposit, or do I need to take my business to the bank in Roswell?" Whitmore took the money with obvious reluctance, making a show of counting it twice as if he expected her to try to cheat him. Eleanor stood there with her spine straight and her head high, refusing to be cowed, until he finally made the notation in her account book and handed it back with a dismissive wave. She left the bank furious and went straight to the general store, where she nearly collided with a woman she vaguely recognized from church, a rancher's wife named Martha Henderson. Martha caught Eleanor's arm to steady her and then held on, her weathered face serious. "Miss Ortega, might I have a word with you? In private?" Surprised, Eleanor followed Martha outside and around the side of the building, away from curious ears. Martha glanced around to make sure they were alone and then spoke in a low, urgent voice. "I need to warn you about something. My husband's ranch hands, including that Cole fellow who has been causing you trouble, they have been talking lately, saying things about you and Isaac that are not fit to repeat. Cole is still angry about being humiliated in the saloon, and he has been drinking more than usual and getting mean. Last night I overheard him telling the other men that someone needs to teach both of you a lesson about respect." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What kind of lesson?" "I do not know exactly, but Cole is the type to hold grudges, and he is not smart enough to think through consequences. I wanted you to be aware, to be careful. Maybe tell Isaac to watch his back as well." "Thank you," Eleanor said sincerely. "I appreciate you telling me this. It could not have been easy, given that Cole works for your husband." Martha's expression turned grim. "My husband pays Cole's wages, but that does not mean I approve of the man or his behavior. I have seen what men like him can do when they feel their pride has been injured. Just be careful, both of you." Eleanor found Isaac at the boarding house and relayed Martha's warning, watching his expression darken with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the dusty street. "I was hoping Cole would let it go," he said finally. "But I should have known better. Men like him do not forget." "What should we do?" Eleanor asked. Isaac turned to face her, his expression determined. "We be careful, like Martha said. We do not go anywhere alone after dark. We stay alert, and if Cole makes a move, we deal with it. But Eleanor, we do not let him control our lives. We do not let fear dictate how we live." "Trouble should fear me instead," Eleanor said, remembering what Isaac had said about her that first day in the saloon, and he smiled grimly. "Exactly." They were careful for the next few weeks, and nothing happened. Eleanor started to think maybe Martha had been wrong, or maybe Cole had thought better of whatever he was planning. But then one evening in late May, as she was walking home from delivering laundry with the sun sinking low and the shadows growing long, she heard footsteps behind her that were too fast, too deliberate. She spun around to find Cole blocking the narrow alley behind her, his face flushed with alcohol and his eyes glittering with malice. He had a rope in his hands and two of his friends flanking him, and Eleanor's heart kicked into a gallop as she realized how isolated this part of town was, how few people were likely to be around to help. Going somewhere, sweetheart? Cole asked, his words slurred, but his intent crystal clear. We have been waiting for a chance to talk to you, just the four of us. Seems like you need to learn some manners about how to behave in a man's world. Eleanor's hand went to her knife, but before she could draw it, one of Cole's friends lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, twisting hard enough to make her gasp with pain. The basket of laundry fell from her other hand, clean sheets scattering in the dirt, and she opened her mouth to scream, but Cole was there with the rope, wrapping it around her arms and pulling tight. Now, he crooned, his breath hot and foul against her face. No need for all that noise. We are just going to go somewhere quiet and have us a little conversation about respect. And maybe when we are done, your cowboy boyfriend will learn to keep his nose out of other people's business. Eleanor fought with everything she had, kicking and biting and struggling, but there were three of them and only one of her, and they were dragging her toward a decrepit shed at the end of the alley when a voice rang out sharp and clear. Let her go, right now. Isaac stood at the mouth of the alley, his gun drawn and his face carved from stone, and behind him were three other men Eleanor recognized as ranchers from the surrounding area, all armed and all looking ready to use their weapons. Cole froze, his hands still gripping the rope that bound Eleanor's arms, his face cycling through expressions too fast to track: surprise, fear, anger, calculation. This is not your concern, Zane, he tried, but his voice shook with uncertainty. The lady and I just have some business to discuss. The lady is coming with me, Isaac said, his voice flat and utterly unyielding. And you and your friends are going to stand there with your hands where I can see them while Sheriff Daniels decides what to do about attempted kidnapping. Eleanor had not even noticed the sheriff approaching from the opposite direction, but there he was, his own gun drawn, and his expression disgusted as he took in the scene. Sheriff Daniels might not like Eleanor much, might wish she would go somewhere else and be someone else's problem, but apparently he drew the line at letting his town's residents be assaulted in broad daylight. Cole Henderson, you are under arrest, Daniels said wearily. You too, Frank and Billy. Drop your weapons and get against that wall. What followed was a confusing blur of activity as the three men were disarmed and marched toward the jail, as Isaac cut the ropes from Eleanor's arms with shaking hands, as the ranchers who had come with him collected her scattered laundry and made sure she was truly unhurt. Eleanor stood in the middle of it all, feeling strangely detached, the reality of what had almost happened slowly sinking in and making her knees weak. How did you know? She asked Isaac when they finally had a moment alone, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. How did you get here in time? I have been following you, Isaac admitted, looking ashamed. At a distance, trying not to be obvious about it, but I have been keeping an eye on you every evening when you make deliveries. After Martha's warning, I could not shake the feeling that something was going to happen. I am sorry I did not tell you. I did not want you to think I was being controlling, or did not trust you to take care of yourself. Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that Isaac had been protecting her without making her feel weak, that he had taken her safety seriously enough to act without undermining her independence. You saved my life, she said. Cole was not planning to just scare me. I could see it in his eyes. I know, Isaac said roughly, pulling her into his arms and holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing against her chest. I know, and the thought of what might have happened if I had been even a few minutes later. His voice broke, and he pressed his face into her hair, his whole body shaking. They stood there in the alley holding each other while the sun finished setting and the stars came out, and Eleanor realized that somewhere along the way she had stopped being alone, that despite all her determination to be independent and self-sufficient, she had let Isaac in, had let him become important to her in ways that were both terrifying and wonderful. "I love you," she said into his shoulder, the words surprising her even as they left her mouth. "I did not mean to. I tried not to, but I do." Isaac pulled back just far enough to see her face, his eyes bright with emotion. "Eleanor Ortega, I have loved you since the first moment I saw you standing in that saloon, refusing to be intimidated by men twice your size. You are the strongest, most stubborn, most incredible woman I have ever met, and I would very much like to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you do not have to be strong alone." He kissed her then, properly this time, his lips warm and gentle against hers, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. Eleanor kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for months, pouring her fear and relief and love into the connection between them, and when they finally broke apart, she was crying and laughing at the same time. "We should probably get out of this alley," Isaac said eventually, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "People are going to start talking." "Let them talk," Eleanor said recklessly. "I am tired of caring what people think." But they did leave the alley eventually, walking back to Eleanor's cabin hand in hand, and the next morning when Eleanor opened her door to start her day, she found Isaac sitting on her step with coffee and fresh bread from the bakery, ready to face whatever came next together. The trial of Cole and his friends was swift and unsympathetic. With multiple witnesses, including Sheriff Daniels himself, there was no question about what had happened or what the intent had been. The judge sentenced all three men to 2 years in territorial prison and banned them from ever returning to Fort Stanton, and the whole town turned out to watch them loaded onto the prison wagon, a clear message that such behavior would not be tolerated. In the aftermath, something shifted in how Fort Stanton viewed Eleanor. She was no longer just the difficult woman who refused to know her place, but the woman who had survived an attack and come out the other side with her head held high. Shopkeepers were suddenly more willing to give her fair prices. Women who had previously snubbed her at church started including her in conversations, and even Whitmore at the bank became marginally less condescending. Eleanor was not sure whether to be grateful for the change or angry that it had taken her near death to earn basic respect, but Isaac counseled her to take the win and focus on her goals rather than dwelling on the injustice of it all. "People are stupid and slow to change," he said pragmatically. "But they can change, given the right motivation. You proved something to them when you refused to be broken by what happened. Use that." So Eleanor did. She went to the bank with Isaac beside her and informed Whitmore that she was ready to make an offer on the land by the river, that she had saved enough for a down payment and would work out terms for the rest. Whitmore, faced with not just Eleanor, but also Isaac, whose family apparently had some banking connections in Texas, agreed to take her seriously and arranged a meeting with the landowner. The negotiation took 3 weeks and several rounds of back and forth, but in the end, Eleanor walked away with a deed to 40 acres of good grazing land with river access, purchased for a price that was high but not extortionate. She stood in the middle of her new property with the deed clutched in her hands and tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the reality that she had actually done it, had achieved the goal that everyone said was impossible for a woman alone. Except she was not alone anymore. Isaac stood beside her with his arm around her waist, looking out over the land that would become their shared future, because somewhere between the attack and the trial and the land purchase, I and you had become we in a way that felt inevitable and right. "So," Isaac said after a long, perfect moment of silence, "what do we do first?" "We build," Eleanor said firmly. "A house first, small but sturdy. Then fencing, a barn, a well. We buy cattle in the fall when the prices drop, start with maybe 20 head and build the herd over time. We work every day from dawn until dusk, and probably half the nights too. and we make this into something that lasts. That sounds like a good plan, Isaac said, but you left out one important step. What is that? He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his, and Eleanor's breath caught as she realized what he was about to say. Marry me, Eleanor, not because you need protection or because society says you should, but because I love you and I want to build this life with you as my partner in everything. Marry me and let us prove that two stubborn people who refuse to give up can accomplish anything they set their minds to. Eleanor wanted to say yes immediately, but old habits made her ask, "Are you sure? I am not going to be a traditional wife. I am going to work the ranch just as hard as you do, make decisions about our business, keep my own accounts. I am not going to suddenly become soft and domestic just because I have a ring on my finger." "I do not want you to be anything other than exactly who you are," Isaac said. "I am asking you to be my partner, not my subordinate. We will build this together, make decisions together, work side by side as equals. That is the only marriage I am interested in having." "Then yes," Eleanor said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in late June in the small church in Fort Stanton with half the town in attendance, some genuinely happy for them and others just there for the spectacle. Eleanor wore a new dress that she had splurged on, pale yellow cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and Isaac wore an actual suit that made him look both uncomfortable and devastatingly handsome. Father Martinez performed the ceremony in both English and Spanish, blessing their union and their future, and when Isaac kissed his bride, there was a sincerity to the gesture that made even the cynics in the congregation sigh. The reception was held at the boarding house with Mrs. Chin providing enough food to feed an army and half the town contributing dishes or drinks or entertainment. Someone had a fiddle and someone else had a guitar, and there was dancing late into the evening despite the heat, couples spinning across the makeshift dance floor with varying degrees of skill and enthusiasm. Eleanor danced with Isaac until her feet ached, laughing at his apologies for being a terrible dancer, feeling lighter and happier than she could remember being in years. As the party wound down and guests began to drift away, Isaac and Eleanor rode out to their land, to the small house they had been building over the past month, with help from some of the local ranchers who had decided that Isaac was good people, and Eleanor had earned her place among them. It was not much yet, just 2 rooms and a loft, but the walls were solid and the roof did not leak, and it was theirs in a way that made Eleanor's heart swell every time she looked at it. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and perfect, 2 people learning each other with patience and care, taking their time because they had the rest of their lives stretching ahead of them. Isaac was gentle with Eleanor, mindful of her inexperience and his own, and if their first attempts at intimacy were more sweet than passionate, there was a promise in the way they held each other afterward that spoke of better things to come with practice and time. "I love you, Mrs. Zane," Isaac whispered into the darkness, his arms wrapped around Eleanor as she lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you too," Eleanor whispered back, "though I am keeping Ortega as well. Eleanor Ortega Zane. Both names, both parts of who I am." "Eleanor Ortega Zane," Isaac repeated, trying it out. "It suits you. Strong and beautiful and stubbornly independent." "Stubbornly independent married women," Eleanor said with a laugh. "Who would have thought such a thing was possible? People who were smart enough to see that the future is not going to look like the past," Isaac said. "We are going to build something new here, Eleanor. Not just a ranch, but a way of living that proves women and men can be true partners. And maybe someday our children will grow up thinking that is normal, that there is nothing strange about a woman having her own dreams and working to achieve them." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at the thought of children, of a future that included not just survival, but joy and family and legacy. "Children," she said softly, "we have not talked about that yet. Do you want them?" Isaac asked carefully. "Because I do, eventually, but only if you do too. This is not something I am going to insist on if it is not what you want." "I want them," Eleanor admitted. "Someday. when the ranch is more established and we are not working quite so hard just to survive. I want children who grow up knowing they can be anything they want to be, do anything they set their minds to. Then that is what we will have, Isaac promised. But not quite yet. For now, let us just focus on building our ranch and learning how to be married to each other. The first year of their marriage was brutally hard work. They spent every daylight hour and many hours after dark working to turn their raw land into a functioning ranch. Isaac built fencing while Eleanor cleared brush and rocks from areas she wanted to use for gardens. Together they dug a well, hauled lumber from town for a barn, negotiated with neighboring ranchers for good breeding cattle. Eleanor continued to take in laundry and mending when she had time, her reputation and Isaac's presence making it easier to find customers, and Isaac hired himself out for occasional ranch work when they needed extra money. Money was constantly tight, and there were moments when Eleanor lay awake at night wondering if they had bitten off more than they could chew, if her dream of owning a successful ranch was going to bankrupt them instead. But every morning she woke up to see the sun rising over land that belonged to her, and every evening she sat down to dinner with a husband who treated her like an equal, and those things made all the hardship bearable. By their first anniversary, they had 40 head of cattle, a functional barn, 3 horses, and a house that was starting to feel like a real home. Eleanor was pregnant, a development that was both planned and somehow still surprising when it became real. And Isaac was so excited about becoming a father that he drove Eleanor half crazy with his constant hovering and worrying. "I am not going to break," she told him for the 1,000th time as he tried to stop her from lifting a water bucket. "Women have been having babies and working ranches for thousands of years. I can manage both." "I know you can," Isaac said, not backing down. "But why should you have to when I am here to help? Let me carry the heavy things. You have enough to deal with growing an entire human being inside you." Eleanor wanted to argue further, but the truth was that she was tired more easily these days, and her back ached in ways it never had before. And secretly she was grateful for Isaac's help, even as she resisted the implication that she could not handle things herself. They compromised, as they did with most things in their marriage, Eleanor agreeing to ask for help with heavy lifting in exchange for Isaac agreeing not to treat her like she was made of glass. Their son was born in February of 1880, during a cold snap that made their little house feel drafty despite Isaac's best efforts to seal every crack. The midwife, a capable woman named Sarah who lived on a neighboring ranch, arrived just in time to help with the delivery, which was long and painful and terrifying, and ultimately triumphant when Eleanor finally held her baby in her arms, a squalling, red-faced miracle that she and Isaac had created together. They named him James after Eleanor's father, with the middle name of Nathaniel after Isaac's father, a joining of their two families and histories into one new beginning. James was a fussy baby who did not sleep well and demanded constant attention, and Eleanor spent the first few months after his birth in a fog of exhaustion and overwhelming love, struggling to balance ranch work with caring for an infant who seemed determined to be as difficult as possible. Isaac stepped up in ways that surprised and touched Eleanor, taking night shifts with James when he could, learning to soothe the baby with rocking and soft singing, never once suggesting that childcare was exclusively Eleanor's responsibility. They worked out a system where Eleanor would nurse James, and then Isaac would take him for an hour or two so Eleanor could sleep, and slowly they found a rhythm that worked for all 3 of them. The ranch continued to grow and thrive. By the time James was 2, they had expanded their herd to over 100 head and hired 2 hands to help with the daily work. Eleanor managed the books and the household with the same fierce efficiency she brought to everything, while Isaac handled the physical labor and the negotiations with buyers and other ranchers. They made a formidable team, and their reputation in Fort Stanton and the surrounding area evolved from that strange couple to those successful ranchers who proved that partnership can work. When James was 4, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose, after Isaac's mother, and 2 years after that came another son they called Thomas. The house expanded with their family, new rooms added as needed until their original 2-room cabin was surrounded by additions and looked more like a proper ranch house than a frontier shack. Life settled into a pattern that was busy and exhausting and deeply satisfying. Eleanor woke every morning to the sound of children laughing and cattle lowing and her husband making coffee in the kitchen, and she went to bed every night grateful for everything they had built together. The dream she had carried from Kansas, the goal that had seemed impossible when she first arrived in Fort Stanton alone and afraid, had become reality through sheer determination and hard work and the love of a good man who believed in her. The years passed in a blur of roundups and brandings, school lessons taught at the kitchen table because the nearest school was too far away, birthdays and Christmases celebrated with increasing prosperity. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading and numbers and showed signs of becoming a skilled rancher like his parents. Rose was wild and fearless, constantly getting into trouble and reminding Eleanor of herself at that age. Thomas was the peacemaker, gentle and kind, always trying to smooth over conflicts between his siblings. Isaac's hair started to show gray at the temples, and Eleanor found her first silver strand when James was 10, physical markers of the passing years that somehow made them both more attractive rather than less. They grew into their partnership the way they grew into their land, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building a shared life that was stronger than either of them could have created alone. By the time James was 15 and already taller than his father, the Zane Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Eleanor had long since proved to everyone, including herself, that a woman could run a ranch as well as any man, and Isaac had proved that a man could be a true partner to a strong woman without losing any of his own strength or identity. They sat on their porch one evening in the summer of 1895, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, their children inside arguing about something trivial, and Isaac reached over to take Eleanor's hand the way he had been doing for 17 years. "Do you remember that first day in the saloon?" he asked. "When Cole shot your whiskey bottle and I came in thinking I was going to have to rescue you?" Eleanor laughed, the sound warm and rich. "I remember thinking you were presumptuous and probably going to be more trouble than you were worth." "And was I?" Isaac asked with mock offense. "Worth the trouble?" Eleanor squeezed his hand, looking at the land they had built together, the home they had created, the family they had raised. "You were worth everything," she said simply. "They said a woman alone was asking for trouble, but you said trouble should fear me instead. Turns out we were both right. Trouble came for me, and I faced it and I won. But I did not have to face it alone, and that made all the difference. We faced it together," Isaac corrected gently. "And we will keep facing it together, whatever comes next." Inside the house, Rose shrieked with laughter at something Thomas said, and James called for them to come settle an argument, and Eleanor stood with a groan, her joints protesting after a long day of work. Isaac rose beside her, and they walked into their house hand in hand, partners in everything, proving every single day that love and respect and shared dreams could build something that lasted. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life and family milestones. James eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, his head for numbers and careful planning making him a natural successor to his parents' legacy. He married a school teacher from Roswell named Catherine when he was 22, and they built their own house on the northern edge of the property, close enough to help but far enough to have their own space. Rose, true to her wild nature, refused several marriage proposals before finally falling in love with a cavalry officer stationed at the fort, a man named William, who was one of the few people capable of keeping up with her energy and spirit. They married when she was 21 and moved to Arizona for a few years before William left the military, and they returned to New Mexico, buying land adjacent to the Zane Ranch and raising horses instead of cattle. Thomas studied to become a doctor, spending several years in St. Louis learning medicine before returning to Fort Stanton to serve the community that had watched him grow up. He married late, at 30, to a widow with 2 young children, and they had 2 more children of their own, filling their house with noise and love. Eleanor and Isaac gradually stepped back from the active management of the ranch, though neither of them ever truly retired. Isaac still rode out most mornings to check on the cattle and the land, and Eleanor still kept the books and managed the household finances, but the burden of daily operations shifted to younger shoulders, as it always did in successful family businesses. They became grandparents 7 times over, and watching their grandchildren run across the same land where they had built their dreams gave Eleanor a sense of completion that she had not known she was seeking. She would sit on her porch with a grandchild on her lap, telling stories about the early days when the house was just 2 rooms and they had only 40 head of cattle, and everyone thought they would fail. And she would see understanding dawn in young eyes about the power of determination and partnership. Fort Stanton grew and changed around them. The military fort eventually closed, and the town transformed from a rough frontier outpost into a proper community with schools and churches, and even a small hospital where Thomas practiced medicine. New families arrived and old ones moved on, the endless cycle of Western migration. But the Zane family remained a constant presence, their ranch a landmark, and their story a legend. People still talked about Eleanor Ortega Zane, the woman who came to town alone and built an empire through sheer force of will and the partnership of a good man who loved her. Young women facing their own struggles would come to her for advice, and Eleanor would tell them the truth as she understood it, that independence and partnership were not mutually exclusive, that love meant supporting each other's dreams rather than demanding their sacrifice, that being strong enough to stand alone meant you were strong enough to choose to stand together. Isaac's health began to fail when he was in his early 60s, his body worn out from decades of hard physical labor and the accumulated injuries of ranch work. He developed a cough that would not go away, and Thomas diagnosed him with a lung condition that had no cure, only management. Eleanor nursed him through the decline with the same fierce determination she had brought to building their ranch, refusing to let him see her fear or despair, staying strong even as her heart broke watching the man she loved fade. He died on a cool October morning in 1905, surrounded by his family in the bedroom of the house they had built together. His last words were to Eleanor, a whispered "I love you" that she held on to like a lifeline as the grief threatened to pull her under. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read Isaac Nathaniel Zane, 1853-1905, beloved husband, father, and partner. Eleanor mourned him deeply, but she did not break. She was 70 years old, with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who needed her, with a ranch that still required attention, with a community that looked to her as an example of strength and perseverance. She continued to live in the house she and Isaac had built, refusing James's gentle suggestions that she might be more comfortable in town, insisting that she would stay on her land until it was her time to join Isaac. She lived another 12 years, active and sharp-minded until nearly the end, finally passing away peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning in 1917 at the age of 82. They buried her next to Isaac on the hill, her headstone reading, Eleanor Maria Ortega Zane, 1835-1917, beloved wife, mother, and pioneer. The ranch continued through James, and then his children and their children, the Zane name becoming synonymous with quality and integrity in New Mexico ranching circles. The original house was preserved as a family landmark, and Eleanor's notebooks with their careful accounting and sketched plans were kept as treasured heirlooms, passed down through generations as proof of what could be accomplished with determination and love. The story of Eleanor and Isaac became part of Fort Stanton's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. They said a woman alone was asking for trouble. The story always began, but one cowboy said trouble should fear her instead. And together they proved that love built on respect and partnership could create something that lasted for generations, a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of showing that women and men could work side by side as equals, building dreams together that neither could have achieved alone. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually stand on that hill overlooking the ranch, reading the headstones of their ancestors, and understand that the land beneath their feet and the opportunities they enjoyed were built on the courage of a woman who refused to accept the limitations society placed on her, and a man who loved her enough to help her break those limitations. The story endured because it mattered, because it showed what was possible when two people chose partnership over power, when they faced trouble together rather than letting it divide them, when they built something that lasted not just for their lifetime, but for all the lifetimes that came after. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the New Mexico hills, people swore they could hear laughter coming from that ranch house, the sound of two people who had loved each other fiercely and built something beautiful together, their spirits lingering in the place they had made their own through sheer determination and unshakable partnership, proving for all time that the best love stories are not about rescue, but about two strong people choosing to be stronger together.